right, so we begin in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
This is something that I found recently, and I thought it was fitting for what we're dealing with, and then now with the hurricane, and just, it's called Trusting the Spiral of the Work. And it talks about active hope. Active hope is not wishful thinking. Active hope is not waiting to be rescued by the Lone Ranger or by some savior. Active hope is waking up to the beauty of life on whose behalf we can act. We belong to this world. The web of life is calling us forth at this time. We've come a long way and are here to play our part. With active hope, we realize that there are adventures in store, strengths to discover, and comrades to link arms with. Active hope is a readiness to engage. Active hope is a readiness to discover the strengths in ourselves and in others. A readiness to discover the reasons for hope and the occasions for love. A readiness to discover the size and strengths of our hearts, our quickness of mind, our steadiness of purpose, our own authority, our love for life, the liveliness of our curiosity, the unsuspected deep well of patience and diligence, the keenness of our senses and our capacity to lead. None of these can be discovered in an armchair or without risks. And so as we begin today, we remember the blessings that we do have, we count those, and we also pray for those who feel like they have no hope in the midst of trials and struggles related to the pandemic, related to the hurricane, any other disasters, our health. And we just ask the Holy Spirit to come upon us today and those parishes that we serve, and for the families that we serve, so that we may continue to live in this active hope and bring the love of Christ to others as we minister. And let us offer an Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Sister Misty. So we have Sister Esther in our office. So she's going to present on protecting God's children and how we move forward during this pandemic. So I'll have you sit right here.
Hey. You heard in this about Courtney's position? You heard in there?
Good morning to all of you. Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I hope that all of you are safe and that your homes are intact. I know all of us have been very concerned about each other during this, especially during this past week and a half. And yet we move forward in hope. We have a year ago, this past summer, we had Imelda. Starting in February and March, we were invaded by the pandemic, which continues. And now, last week, we had Laura. So it seems like it just keeps coming. And I know all of you, as everyone, really struggles to keep hopeful and positive, and to continue with the mission that we all have to bring Jesus to each other. One particular scripture that I hold on to, especially with these 3 invasions, is the passage that says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will refresh you." We certainly have been burdened and are burdened. We certainly are doing our best to labor for the Lord, and we certainly need the refreshment of Jesus. And so that's what we're about as we continue the mission of Jesus. And I realize that everyone, and particularly all of you religious education and PCLs, catechists and so forth, that we have to be very creative now because of social distancing, because of prohibitions against large gatherings. And so I am sure that all of you have been maybe discussing with each other and trying to find very creative ways to do your catechis, to do the teaching, to prepare for the sacraments. And as I come to you today about the safe environment training, I probably, like you, don't know what's coming, don't really know how this is going to come about, because all we know is what was in place last year and years before that was very easy when you could have the in-person classes and do your safe environment training. So, a couple of things. I don't have a lot of answers either. But let's look at the safe environment training for your students. You have various alternatives for your catechesis, and that would include the safe environment training. Perhaps you have, I don't know, you may or may not have some very small gatherings. I'm not sure if you're doing that. You're maybe doing the technology, using Zoom, using whatever you can to reach out to your students, to work with the parents. I think you have the option of your parents helping with the catechesis and perhaps the safe environment training as well. The fact is, we have to do the best that we can. It's not going to be perfect. The fact is also that we are not exempted from the charter audit report that I have to send in for the entire diocese. Even that's going to end up being somewhat creative, if you might say. There may be a situation where you cannot, and the parents cannot fully train one of your students this year if they're up for training. You know, you've got some years where you don't have to train, and then you have to train them with a new module. It may be that none of your creative options are going to work. And what do you do whenever you have to report, well, how many are trained and how many are not trained, and so forth? If your students have been trained in the past year or two, then consider them as trained. They may not have a session this year. They may not be able to actually go through a session, whether it's virtually or in person. But if they've been trained in the past couple of years, then please consider them trained, because that's what I do when I do the report for the entire diocese. I look at those you trained in a particular year, and then I count other ones in between that have already been trained. What I do in terms of reporting those who have not had training is I look at first grade. And some of you have pre-K classes. So if if the pre-K have not been trained, and then the first graders have not been trained, or an individual, then I count those as untrained. Some of them may, like first graders, they may get some training this year, but that's where I get the source for those that are untrained, which I do have to report on the audit itself. So we're going to try to do our best. I have not yet sent out the report form because I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, and I don't want to send you exactly the same thing I've been sending you, because I don't want to put that pressure on you. And it may look more like the same, but I want you to remember the caveat that I have just given you. Again, I'm going to need your reports back by December. I think I spent 2 or 3 months chasing people down for it. And I realize that these are unprecedented times. So I may have to remind some of you, but if you are really in a bind, well, just let me know so that I'm aware that you are working on it. A second thing is the Protecting God's Children training for adults, like your teachers, your catechists, your other helpers that you have, yourself. Again, in-person training is not taking place now because of COVID. So that too is affected. We are not exempt from having safe environment training for adults. Again, we still stay with the 5 years. Individuals have to be retrained after 5 years. But what are we going to do for our adults who have not had any training yet? Some of those may be catechists. Some of those may be working with you, with the children, if you have in-person training with the children and so forth. What are we going to do? Well, Paul especially has been working with Virtus, and we have come to a point where Virtus is developing an online module very similar to the recertification module that is already on our website. Now, what is the recertification module for? It's for those whose initial training has expired after 5 years. So most of us have done the recertification because our training initially was many years ago. This new module is going to be for the initial training. That training where we had to go through 2 or 3 hours, we would watch a video or a couple of videos that would really impact us. There was some discussion and so forth. So I call that the initial training. So when we are able to get the module up and running, then Paul and Brian will send out a notice to everybody that it's available. So if you have persons and volunteers who help you and are going to be working with the children, maybe not in the near future, but eventually, you want to get them trained. And so that module will be on our website. And I believe that it'll be similar to the recertification. We take the training, we are entered as completing the training and the date, and then you can print out your certificate. And so when individuals do the training, they should be giving you their certificates so that you have them on file and you can verify that they have been trained. Those who do a recertification, they should be giving you the new certificates as well, because you need those for your files to verify that they have been trained. It's the proof that you need. And then that will help. I don't know if you or you with the parish secretary in the spring fill out the parish administration charter report, which reports the number of employees who have had safe environment training, who have had background checks, and the dates. And then you send in, or with the report is sent a list of all the employees with all the dates and all the volunteers with all the dates. So some of the PCLs have a large input into that for the parish secretary. So that's the up and coming initial module. And I am not sure how much longer it will be, an anticipated time. There's all kinds of things that could delay it, pandemic as well, but I know Virtus is working very hard on it. They have been absolutely wonderful in helping us. And we all might remind ourselves to keep them in prayer, because they have been so generous with us and doing a very good job. And especially now, trying to help us all during this pandemic to continue the safe environment training as much as possible. The other piece that y'all are probably having to monitor is the background checks for adults. Again, those, not the safe environment training, the criminal backgrounds and the national sex offender backgrounds, they expire after 7 years, as you might be aware. At some point in the future, we may be changing that to expiring every 5 years, because so much can happen in a person's background. 7 years might be a little too long. So when we had our auditors here last summer or the summer before, they made that recommendation that we change the time frame for the background checks. But we have not done that yet. And certainly that's not on our radar immediately, but we are going to be looking at that. Those background checks still have to be done. The Human Resources Office is fully operational. What you have to do, what you're already doing, is you get the individual to fill out that background screening questionnaire, and you send that with their copy of their driver's license, and you send it to Maria in the HR department. And then she processes those and sends them to our vendor who does the actual screenings. So it generally takes about 2 weeks, sometimes a little more, depending. But they're very good about continuing to keep the schedule in terms of doing those background screenings. And as you know, the results are sent to the pastor. And then a notice is also sent to the secretary of the parish, letting them know that so-and-so had these background screenings and the date and so forth. Hopefully that's getting down to you. And I hope there's a good line of communication there, so you are aware that those who are helping you with the students, that they are fully in compliance with the charter, safe environment, background screenings, and all of that. And so things continue as much as possible as we have been doing, but we're all going to have to make the adjustments and be creative and be patient and work together in terms of the catechesis and the sacramental preparation that y'all are all going through.
So, any questions?
Do any of you have any questions that I might be able to answer? If not now, if you have questions, feel free to email me or call me. I'll do my best to respond to those as soon as possible. And, you know, questions may come up later as you really get into what this year is going to be like for you. But I'm available to any of you at any time with all of these matters that we've just discussed. All right. Be safe, be hopeful, do the best you can, and know that the Lord will supplement and do the rest. Okay? Bye.
Thank you, sister. So I hope that was helpful to everyone. And like she said, if you have any questions, you could reach out to her, you could reach out to us. You know, we're here to support you in all the safe environment aspects, of course, with evangelization and catechesis as well. Before I hand off the reins to Dr. White, one other issue I'd like to share with everybody. This year is an election year, and the United States Conference for Catholic Bishops has on their website a thing called Faithful Citizenship. It's good to really look at that. As a parish catechetical leader, you are a public figure, and so we want to make sure that we're not promoting a particular party or a particular person, but we are promoting what Catholic social teaching gives us. So that's what we're promoting. That's what we're teaching, is the 7 tenets of Catholic social teaching, and you'll find that on that website. So I just want to make that clear, that you are a public figure. I remember one time a colleague of mine in another diocese wore a T-shirt with a candidate on, and she really could not do that. So that's because we're a public figure, we need to make sure that we're teaching the values that we have, not a particular candidate that we're promoting or anything, but the values that we have. So any questions on that? Anything to add, Paul?
Well, no, the 7 principles are a good kind of outline to review almost daily with everything going on around us. And to keep in mind that in Catholic social teaching, it specifically says that in Catholic social teaching, politics should be about the common good. That's exactly what it says. So it's like, as Brian says, it's important for us as people of faith and public figures that we don't come out endorsing or criticizing any person or party. We can't be affiliated in any way publicly because of the position we have. We do have a responsibility to promote, as Brian was saying, our principles. Remember, we're people of faith and reason, faith and reason. So we want to keep that in mind as we're struggling through, decisions and conversations, and always try to promote, these principles. That's what we want to extract. If we find ourselves in a conversation, always try to extract our principles rather than the cult of personality or whatever that goes on out there. Focus on, have the lens of Christ. We always strive to in our faith is to have a converted heart and a transformed conscience, and that's the lens that we strive for. So we really don't fit in, or shouldn't fit into, any platform completely, because we want to fit in with Christ, and that's the lens we want. And the other thing to keep in mind with that is we talk about a consistent ethic of life, a consistent ethic of life. We don't pick out like a cafeteria what we want. It's the idea of politics being about the common good, and we strive for a consistent ethic of life. So those would be the things that I would encourage us all. Like Brian said, if you can go to that website and read up on some of these things, it will help you. So that's all I have to add, really.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and much of that is incorporated within your textbooks, the things that you're promoting that your catechists are teaching already. So it's within there. Many of them done a very good job of incorporating those themes of Catholic social teaching. Like OSV, right, Michael?
That's right.
So,
Yeah,
and
John,
then, yes,
could
go
I say,
ahead.
I just wanted to remind our PCLs that they're not, when I first started as a DRE, I was not aware of the number of people that paid attention to what I said and what I did.
Yeah.
So you need to be very aware that even if you think you're not important, because most of us, we're just doing our job, that people are paying attention to what you say and what you do. And that includes your private web pages. We like to separate, well, this is my public self and this is my private self. But in ministry, we can't do that. It has to be totally integrated.
Including social media.
All your social media,
Yep.
all your, all of that stuff has to be consistent with church teaching. You can't you can't assume that people are not paying attention.
Yep.
So just be aware that everybody's looking to you and you're to be promoting our values.
Okay. The newsletter, the September newsletter, will be out next week. I have a meeting with our new bishop, Bishop David Toops, on Friday, and there's a few things I need to go over with him to be incorporated in that newsletter. So, so it's coming. It'll be next week, and we'll have things like lay missionary disciples for those of you who have not attended or attended very few of those sessions. We'll be talking about that in the newsletter. We'll be talking about our virtual called, formed, and sent day that we'll have in November. So we'll get some more details out for that. And a lot of other things that are coming up. And I know we had to cut our budget quite a bit, so we have actually 4 of these going on throughout the year. But I'm really counting on Twyla and Sister Misty to do what they have been doing, is to connect with you on a regular basis and make sure that there's opportunities, whether Zoom or other platform, to gather together as a community. With that said, I think I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Joseph White. Some of you are familiar with him. He was with us a few years ago when we were going through Hurricane Harvey. He is with OSV. We also have Mike Hoyt of OSV. He's representing OSV, and so he's here. Toward the end, he was going to kind of present what offerings that OSV has. But without further ado, Dr. Joseph White is going to lead us and talk about this new directory for catechesis.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be with all of you. I was worried about you last week. I'm glad to see everybody's faces, and I hope that that you didn't get hit too hard by the hurricane. We continue over here in the Austin area to keep you in prayer, and as well as our brothers and sisters in Louisiana, especially in Lake Charles, and some of those hard-hit regions. I want to just share my screen here so that I can show you these slides as we go. Excited to talk to you today about the new directory for catechesis. Let me just give you a rundown of what we'll do in the next several minutes here. I'd like to give you just kind of a brief history of this document, how this came to be, how it's organized, what some of the major themes are, and then the application of those themes to catechetical ministry. And I will call on you in discussion as we talk about that, because I'd like to hear your thoughts about that application as well.
And by the way, this is being recorded.
Yeah, so don't say anything you don't want on the record. And I'll try not to as well. So a little bit of background. And I think most of you know this stuff, so I'm just going to review this very briefly. But The first general catechetical directory came out in 1971 and was a response to a call from the Second Vatican Council to put together a directory or a set of directives on catechesis. When I'm talking with catechists about what the general directory is, I say it's not a list of websites, it's not a phone book, it's not that kind of directory. It's a list of directives, of directions for how we hand on the faith. So the GCD came out in 1971, was written to, and this is a quote from the foreword, to provide the basic principles of pastoral theology by which pastoral action in the ministry of the word can be more fittingly directed and governed, including the correct way of understanding the nature and purposes of catechesis and also the truths which are to be taught by it. Not too long after that, that first catechetical directory, Pope St. John Paul II wrote his beautiful apostolic exhortation on catechesis, Catechesi Tradendae, and that came out, I think it was in 1978. And that really coalesced and reframed a lot of themes in catechesis for us, and became a guiding document in catechesis along with the general catechetical directory. But then we also had in 1993 the publication under Pope St. John Paul II, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And that, combined with some of the themes that were being carried over from Catechesi Tradendae, really necessitated a new directory. So the General Directory for Catechesis was published in 1997, capitalized on those themes of Catechesi Tradendae and also affirmed the importance of catechesis of adults, discussed evangelization and enculturation of the faith, and also listed 6 essential tasks of catechesis. So those 6 tasks of catechesis that we hear so much about originated there with the GDC. And then in 2015, there was a plenary meeting of the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of the New Evangelization. And that meeting was about the relationship between catechesis and evangelization, and included representatives from all around the world. And there at that meeting, they discussed a lot of new developments in both the church and contemporary society, including the secularization of the Western world, that they really felt like led to the need for a new directory. And so with the input of a worldwide team of experts, a first draft of that directory was written and discussed at the 2017 plenary meeting 2 years later. And then that was further revised. The revised text was sent to approximately 200 theologians and catechists and further elaborated and revised. If you've heard that a new directory for catechesis was coming for years, it really was coming, but it was being revised and revised and revised. And the final product is actually the 12th draft of this directory. So it's definitely been worked over, should be very polished, and I think it is. The final version was released June 25th, came out a few weeks later in English. And here's how it's organized. There are 12 chapters in the new directory that's divided into 3 parts of 4 chapters each. So very nice, neat division there. Part 1 is titled Catechesis in the Church's Mission of Evangelization. Really kind of gives the background of the relationship between catechesis and evangelization and what catechesis is and who catechists are. We'll talk a little bit more as we go chapter by chapter. And then part 2 is called the process of catechesis. That's where you get into the practical nuts and bolts of catechesis. And then part 3, catechesis in the particular churches, which is how catechesis takes shape on the ground, who's leading that, and how does catechesis interact with society, locally speaking. So let's just go through each of those sections and talk about what's in each chapter, and then I'll talk about some major themes and threads that run through the whole thing, and we'll connect it with our work as parish catechetical leaders. So part 1, catechesis in the church's mission of evangelization. This portion of the document talks about the relationship between catechesis and evangelization and our missionary mandate, the church's responsibility to go out and share that good news of Jesus Christ. Chapter 1 is titled Revelation and its Transmission. It talks about the sources of divine revelation and the role of the church in transmitting that divine revelation. Presents an overall vision of evangelization. The second chapter, The Identity of Catechesis, talks about the nature, process, goals, and sources of catechesis. And it focuses very heavily on the kerygma, the core of the gospel message, that initial proclamation of the gospel message and its relationship to catechesis. We'll talk more about that as we talk about common threads in the directory, because this certainly is one of them. Chapter 3 is titled The Catechist, and this focuses on the identity and vocation of the catechist. It describes various participants in catechesis and their unique roles, for example, bishops, priests, parents, lay catechists. And then chapter 4 is called The Formation of Catechists. This one I think is especially meaty and one to pay close attention to as catechetical leaders, because, and in fact, I did a whole other presentation for another group just based on this chapter, because there's a lot of new material here about the dimensions of catechist formation, how we should form our catechists, how to include and balance all of those different skills and dimensions that we need. So this one I certainly would point you to for additional reference there. And then the second the second main part of the directory is called The Process of Catechesis. This talks about how the faith is handed on, as well as the different topics and settings of catechesis. Chapter 5 is called The Pedagogy of the Faith. This focuses on how God teaches us and how our teaching, our catechesis, should be a reflection of that divine pedagogy. We certainly saw this theme 7 GDC. I would say it's a little more fleshed out and elaborated here in terms of describing then what the implications are for our catechesis. If you know my work at all, you know that this is a particular area of interest for me. I did a book called The Way God Teaches about catechesis and the divine pedagogy. So I was really excited to see this chapter here, and I think we'll be breaking this apart for years to come as well. Chapter 6 is called The Catechism of the Catholic Church. This focuses on the content of the faith that's proclaimed in catechesis, which is summarized in our catechism, and also how those topics that are summarized in our catechism help us to form a cohesive and a coherent identity as Catholics. Chapter 7 is called Methodology in Catechesis. And this chapter offers reflection on the variety of methods that we use in our work in forming others in the faith, and that includes the importance of human experience, memory, language, and the arts. I'll talk a little bit more about methodology with respect to the directory in a few minutes. Chapter 8 is called Catechesis in the Lives of Persons. This focuses on the groups and individuals whose faith is being formed in catechesis, so the participants in catechesis. I really enjoyed this chapter because I'm a child and family psychologist, and one of the things that this chapter does is just goes age by age, from very early childhood all the way through elderly adulthood, and talks about what are the needs of those different groups, how might catechesis be different, what are the goals of catechesis with people of each of those age groups. And I think they did a really nice job just integrating what we know about the human person, how people grow, how they change in their thinking, what's happening in their lives, and how this connects with how we might form them in the faith. One of the threads that runs through this directory, and I'll refer to this a little later when I talk about common themes, is this idea that we should draw on science, that we should, look at the various sources of knowledge about our world and about the human person, and use that to make our catechesis more effective. And the directory models this in a great way in this chapter, because they've really drawn on education and human development and some of those different fields that help us understand people better, and talked about how we can use that knowledge in our catechesis. This chapter also highlights the role of parents as the first and most important teachers of the faith. There's a section on catechesis in the family, on catechesis with families, and also talks about the importance of growing in the faith throughout our lives. There's a particular focus here on some individual groups in catechesis. Catechesis for persons with disabilities is covered in a few paragraphs there. Catechesis for migrants and for immigrants, and other people who might be viewed as being on the margins. And you know, we want to pay particular attention to them and to their needs. That's part of our Catholic respect for the common good, the good of everyone. We pay particular attention to those who might not have as powerful a voice, or who might fall through the cracks, and so there is particular attention paid to them in this chapter as well.
And in our diocese, we have a many prisons, so it even talks about
It does.
catechesis in prisons as well.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, Brian. In fact, that's the very last section of that chapter, talks about catechesis in prisons. Part 3 is called Catechesis in the Particular Churches. And this part of the document talks about specific challenges in the local church. Chapter 9 is titled The Christian Community as Participant in Catechesis. And this talks first about the importance of the ministry of the Word and how the ministry of the Word takes place in community. And so then it talks about various communities that carry out that mission on the diocesan level, on the parish level, also in associations and movements. Those communities have a share in this ministry of the Word. Catholic schools. With regard to associations and movements, I think this section is interesting, and partly because in my conversations with catechetical leaders, I have heard examples of both times that associations and movements and groups within the parish are helpful to catechetical leaders and to the ministry of catechesis in the parish. And I've also heard examples of when these groups can really be a challenge, and when there's some tension there and some conflict. And I think the directory offers us some great guidance for navigating some of those challenges, particularly in directives toward those groups with regard to their share in the ministry of the Word, but also to us in how we might approach them and dialogue with them and collaborate, work together with them. I think those different associations and movements can be real assets to us in catechesis, but we also want to be careful that that associations and movements and their work don't foster some kind of a cliquish mentality or foster kind of an insular kind of thinking and practice within the parish, a silo mentality that keeps people from going out and evangelizing. And so it's, you know, there are multiple issues to flesh out there, but this chapter I think gives us a lot to chew on with regard to that as well. Chapter 10, this is titled Catechesis in the Face of Contemporary Cultural Scenarios. And this talks about the cultural and social dimensions of catechesis in the midst of the new social and economic challenges posed by our society today. This chapter is one of the longest chapters in the directory, maybe the longest. It runs around 80 pages and really covers many different things, including religious pluralism, the fact that the interconnectedness of our society and the rise in migration and other factors have led to very pluralistic societies where you have people with lots of different beliefs about religion and spirituality, different religions, no religion at all, and trying to live together and function together in community. And what are the implications of that in terms of the relationship of those of us who are in the church with others who might have different beliefs. How are we respectful in the public square, but still able to maintain and proclaim our identity as Catholics and what we believe? That's addressed here in this chapter. Also addressed with regard to our relationship and dialogue in the public square, things like bioethical issues. What is our relationship as a church with biomedical science and some of those fields, for example? How might we enter into dialogue such that that we become better informed about the scientific sides of all of this, but also we are a voice for example, in biomedical science, a voice for the common good, making sure that science is working for the common good. And the common good always means also particular attention to the least of those among us, to making sure that we're paying attention to the good of everyone. That's how that term common good, incidentally, differs from another term that you hear sometimes, the greater good, which sometimes is used in a utilitarian kind of context. When people talk about, well, we're doing this for the greater good, people might in biomedical science sometimes say, well, we're sacrificing human embryos for the greater good of an advance in medical science that might save a lot of lives. Well, as Catholics, obviously, we can't accept that because the common good means the good of everyone and particular protection for the least of those among us. And so we're a different voice when it comes to those things, but also appreciating the ways that scientific advancement can also benefit the common good, and holding up the goodness of that and supporting that as well. So it's not church against science, as many young people seem to believe today, that that the church is anti-science. The Catholic Church has never been anti-science. But we do believe that faith has a voice in this conversation when we're talking about science. Also mentioned here, and of some note, especially given Pope Francis's passion about the issue, is the way that environmental science might also inform our understanding of what we as Christians need to do to be good stewards of the environment, good stewards of the world that we live in. There's a discussion here of migration and immigration and the implications of that from a Catholic standpoint, and catechesis in general on those different aspects of Catholic social teaching, and some words here about how we hand that on. So this is a great chapter to read right now, I think, as people are talking about some of these different social issues with regard to the upcoming elections. I think, delving into chapter 10 of the directory and then reading that alongside the Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship document of the bishops that was mentioned earlier on would be a wonderful preparation to be able to speak to some of those issues as people might come to you for resources or questions about some of those different social issues that really enter the political spectrum. I certainly want to endorse and support what Brian said about how as Catholic leaders, we have a responsibility not so much to endorse a particular candidate. In fact, we can't do that, especially not in the name of a parish or a church. But not the responsibility to do that, but the responsibility to help people appropriately form their consciences. And so this chapter gives us some guidance about, how do we help people form their conscience with regard to some of these issues that enter that political spectrum and that social spectrum in the public square. Chapter 11 is called Catechesis at the Service of Enculturation of the Faith. And this chapter talks about the reasons for enculturation, for, how do we enflesh the gospel in various cultural contexts in various societies and capitalize on the gifts and traditions of those cultural contexts while at the same time preserving the integrity of the faith and the unity of the faith. Also provided here in chapter 11 are guidelines for the development of local catechisms as tools to foster enculturation of the faith. And an example of that would be what we sometimes refer to here in the United States as the Adult Catechism, the United States Catholic Catechism for Adults. This is our local catechism in the United States. So when the global church says local, what they mean, yeah, there Brian is holding it up there. When the global church says local, what they mean typically is the local conference of bishops. And that's typically situated by country. So here in the United States, we have the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops. Sometimes when they say the local church, they also mean the diocese, but usually they'll say the particular church when they mean the diocese. Just to, giving you some guidance on decoding this language as you read through the directory. Local church usually means the U.S. for us, and then particular church means for you guys the Diocese of Beaumont. So that's how that works. And then chapter 12. This one is called The Organisms at the Service of Catechesis. Maybe it was translation or something, but I thought that was kind of an unusual name, the organisms, because I think of that as more like biological science. But in any case, what this is talking about is the roles of the different structures that oversee catechesis. So what is the role of the Holy See, of the Vatican, in overseeing catechesis? There's a lot in there about the functions of the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of the New Evangelization, which is the body of the Vatican that oversees catechesis since the last year of Pope Benedict's reign. He transferred, it used to be the Congregation for the Clergy. So if you look at the GDC, our last directory, on the cover it says Congregation for the Clergy. That's where it came from. But now it's the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of New Evangelization that oversees catechesis in the Catholic Church. So the Holy See, the conferences of bishops, the dioceses, these are the different structures that are discussed in chapter 12 and their roles in overseeing catechesis in their particular areas. All right, so now I want to launch into some key themes in the new directory, and after that, would it be helpful? I mean, we're almost an hour into this meeting. I know you had some material before I started. Would it be helpful just to have a little stretch break for 5 minutes before we go into this part? Some people are nodding. Okay. Let's just maybe do a 5-minute stretch break. That's going to put us starting again at 10:58. Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of the threads that run through the directory.
Sounds great.
All right. All right. We are at 10:58, so I'm going to go ahead and resume. Hope folks are back. Sometimes I can't tell because some of the cameras are off. Okay. So I want to talk now about some of the key themes in the new directory. First theme is encounter and accompaniment. Encounter is one of the most frequently used words in this document. That shouldn't surprise you if you know Pope Francis's writings, and this quotes extensively from Pope Francis. The word encounter appears nearly 60 times in the new directory. And it's talked about in many different ways. Encounter with Jesus, encounter with Scripture, our encounter with the world community, especially there in chapter 10, that chapter I just discussed with you, and our encounter with others in the catechetical process. So our encounter as catechist with participants in catechesis. And that one begins as encounter and continues as accompaniment. The directory frames a lot of our work with people in catechesis as accompaniment, that we walk together with them as they are formed in the faith. Another key theme is kerygma. This is from the preface to the Directory for Catechesis. We must not think that in catechesis the kerygma gives way to a supposedly more solid formation. Nothing is more solid, profound, secure, meaningful, and wisdom-filled than that initial proclamation. All Christian formation consists of entering more deeply into the kerygma. So when we talk about the kerygma, what we're referring to is, and the way that Pope Francis talks about it, it's the saving message of Jesus Christ. And Pope Francis summarizes it very well in his apostolic exhortation to youth, Christus Vivit. I always tend to like the fourth chapter of his apostolic exhortations the best. I don't know what it is, but it seems like he kind of revs up and gets to this kind of a crescendo, this golden chapter. By the fourth chapter, I in chapter 4 of Amoris Laetitia was when he did the exegesis on 1 Corinthians 13 and talks about what it means, love is patient. What does it mean that love is kind? Beautiful chapter. And here in Christus Vivit, he uses the fourth chapter to proclaim the kerygma to young people. And so he really models this for us. And he sums it up in 3 sentences. God loves you, Christ is your Savior, and Christ is alive and wants you to be alive. So in the new directory, it talks about proclaiming that message and always making that the core of our message, both initially to people, because, people don't really care to know a lot about Jesus and the church until they've really fallen in love with Jesus and the church, right? So, and let me give you an example of that. When we're when we're meeting somebody out in public, if we're, especially if we're like, on a bus or a train or a plane or something with strangers, not that we're doing that much right now during the pandemic, but you can think back to the time that we did, remember that? So if somebody sat next to us and told us all the details of their day and everything that had been going on in their lives, we might even be a little weirded out by that. We might be like, I don't want to know all of this personal information about this person. But remember the first time you fell in love, and do you remember some of the conversations that you had then? You might just call each other up and have silly phone conversations that start with, what are you doing? What'd you do earlier today? You wanted to know everything, not simply just because you wanted the factual knowledge, but because you were in love, right? We naturally want to know about our beloved. And so this idea of making the kerygma central to our catechesis is really about ensuring that people fall in love with Jesus in the church. Because if we just sit people in front of us and we tell them a lot of facts about Jesus and the church before they've really fallen in love, then what does it matter to them? Why would they care? I mean, sometimes, kids and teens will even look at us or even say out loud, why would I care about this, right? And so they need to hear that message first. And we need to be reminded of that message of the kerygma. And that's something that the directory really points out to us as well. We have to be continually reminded because sometimes our faith grows cold and we need something to spark that flame again.
Can I add something here, Joseph?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
So the kerygma is the encounter with a person, and that person is Jesus. It's the Paschal mystery that we experience every Holy Week and Easter. Okay, and it's a proclamation of the kingdom of God, of a person, but it also is an invitation, and with the invitation, it leads to a response, and that response is in faith and conversion. So I just wanted to add that there's a whole process to this kerygma.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. And that's something we don't want to lose there. There's also, and I'll want to connect this to when we get to this common theme of a mystagogic catechesis, of mystagogia that runs through the directory as well, because this is part of that as well, that we immerse ourselves in the Christian mystery. And, one of the things that Pope Francis says often about catechesis is that we need a catechesis not only of the head, but also of the heart and of the hands. And all three are important, right? We can't live a faith we don't know. So, the head is important. We need to know our faith. But we also have to have our heart formed in the faith. And we also need to live out the faith with our hands. And so the kerygma is this part of that message that really speaks to the heart. It's really, as Brian said, where we have that encounter with Jesus Christ, that life-changing encounter that produces conversion. And so that kerygma is always going to be a proclamation of the Paschal mystery, and particularly that Paschal mystery with reference to that individual person, which I think is why Pope Francis frames it in terms of, God loves you, Christ died to save you, and Christ is alive and wants you to be alive. So you hear in that mystery that we proclaim in the Mass, but you also hear in that, as we do in the Mass too, this idea of ourselves being intertwined within that Paschal mystery. Okay, so that leads me to this next point, that mystagogy is a theme that you see threaded throughout the Directory for Catechesis as well. In the directory in paragraph 64, it says the catechumenal inspiration of catechesis does not mean reproducing the catechumenate in a servile manner, but taking on its style and its formative dynamism, responding also to the need for a mystagogical renewal, one which would assume very different forms based on each educational community's discernment. So a mystagogical catechesis implies many different things, and I think one of them is that you have present there the witness of the Christian community that's walking with the person who's being formed. You have that immersion in the Paschal mystery that we've been talking about. Also, because the catechumenate happens in various stages, that people are formed and progress through this process as they're formed and as they're ready for the next stage. I think patterning our catechesis on the catechumenate also means that we take a developmentally responsive approach. And that means certainly and probably primarily looking at, what are the developmentally appropriate ways to couch that message based on a person's age and stage in life. But the directory also makes the point that we need to consider a developmentally responsive approach based on a person's maturation of the faith as well, stages of faith. So, someone could be, for example, an adolescent and have a very mature faith, and someone could be an older adult and be an infant in the faith. So it's important to consider all of these things as we approach catechesis with the people that we serve. Finally, a mystagogical catechesis implies a catechesis of the senses. That immersion in that mystery means that we also have many different sensory signs of that mystery. And one of the things for me as someone who grew up, I grew up in the Church of Christ, which is an evangelical Protestant denomination you may be familiar with. Very similar in many ways to the Baptist Church. I don't think we would have said that when I was in the Church of Christ, but it was very similar in many ways to Baptist. Very kind of scaled down in terms of ceremony and tradition. In fact, our church buildings in the Church of Christ, the places where we worshiped would have looked more like the parish halls in the Catholic Church, just not a lot of, no icons, no symbols, a lot of blank walls and seats. So coming into the church and experiencing the sacraments, and all of the sensory signs of the sacraments, it was like a sensory banquet for me. There are things you can see and hear and smell and touch and taste. All of our senses are involved in these sacramental signs. So when you think about the catechumenate and its apex there, the sacraments of initiation, and the way that those signs of those sacraments engage the senses, we are challenged, if we're thinking about how to pattern our catechesis after the catechumenate, also to think about how we might make catechesis engage the various senses of the learner, right? So catechesis needs to be more than people sitting around a table, thumbing through a workbook, reading, taking turns reading passages and filling in the blanks. It needs to be an active, engaging sensory experience. What are we doing for people who learn best by seeing? What are we doing for people that learn best by hearing? What are we doing for people that learn best by doing and engaging the body in the, you know, and I think especially for kids. I mean, we as adults, we can gather, you know, like this around a screen for an hour and just talk. It's hard for kids to do that. So when we think about our youngest learners especially, but I think even for adults, you know, it's helpful to think about how are we engaging the senses of our adult learners as well. Another key theme in the new directory is inclusion. The directory in paragraph 295 says, accepting the challenge of evangelization means bringing the word of God to the farthest reaches, opening oneself to all the peripheries. Now this word peripheries we've seen before, especially in Evangelii Gaudium. Oops, I went too far there. The apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium of Pope Francis. And when Pope Francis uses that word peripheries, remember he's writing in Spanish, so he's writing the word periferias, and periferias has a particular meaning for Pope Francis, because as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, in Buenos Aires, there's an area of town that's known as the periferias. The periferias are the slum communities on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, and it's where the poorest of the poor, those who are most marginalized, live. So when Pope Francis talks about wanting a church that goes out to the periferias, he has a particular vision in his head of going out to those farthest reaches of the community and including those who are most poor, who are most marginalized. The Directory for Catechesis calls us to share the faith with and appreciate the gifts of persons with disabilities, migrants and immigrants, prisoners, indigenous people, persons living in poverty, and others who have been pushed in some way or another to the margins of society. We have a responsibility as Catholics who respect the dignity of the human person and pay attention in a special way to those who might not have a voice or who might be considered the least of those among us. We have a particular responsibility to minister to them. And so the directory makes it a point to talk very specifically about some of these different groups who have traditionally been marginalized in society and sometimes, sadly, even in our church. So we want to consider, you know, how might we use the guidance of the directory to make a particular effort toward outreach, to catechetical outreach toward these different populations. Another key theme in the new directory is dialogue with the arts and sciences. The Directory for Catechesis in paragraph 181 says, in the logic of the incarnation, fidelity to God and fidelity to humanity are profoundly interrelated. It should be borne in mind, therefore, that the inspiration of faith assists in a correct evaluation of the contribution of the human sciences. And then in other ways, the directory also talks about you know, both how the sciences inform us and our work, and also how we might form and inform the sciences. So it really is a dialogue that's discussed here. And I referred to some of that when we were talking about some of the material in chapter 10, so I won't rehash too much of that. But also of note here is the arts side of this, that that we have mentioned here in the directory in paragraph 172 of the three transcendentals that you've probably heard Bishop Barron talk about so much. These are the three transcendental qualities of being that the ancient philosophers pointed to, and that people throughout history, theologians and philosophers have pointed to. Those three things about life that tend to point us to something beyond ourselves, that kind of call us outside ourselves and make us think, hey, there must be something more, there must be a God. And those things are truth, beauty, and goodness, right? And so one of the things that I've heard Bishop Barron and Pope Francis and others allude to is this idea that we live in a society where people are skeptical that truth even exists, that there is an objective truth, right? It's more and more common, especially if you're talking with younger people, that you hear people say, well, who's to say whether there's anything that we could really call true? I have my personal truth, you have your personal truth. Truth is seen as just kind of a personal subjective thing, not an objective thing. That poses a challenge for us in catechesis, because how do we believe as Catholics, and I hope we can all agree on this, we believe as Catholics that there is such thing as an objective truth, right? We have certain objective truths that we share. We proclaim some of those truths in our creed, for example. And so how do we engage a society that doesn't believe in objective truth? Do we engage them by trying to teach them what the objective truths are? Well, we do, but sometimes we fail to engage them with that. Sometimes that's not the entryway for us, right? We have to get there eventually, right? We have to get there, because nobody can come to Christ and come to his church and still believe that there's no such thing as objective truth. You have to believe, the truths of the faith and profess those truths in order to really come to Christ and his church. But in terms of engagement, in terms of coming into the doorway and opening people to it, we have those other transcendentals at our disposal. Excuse me, allergy season. I don't know if it's bad there, but it's really bad here. So those other two transcendentals, beauty and goodness, sometimes are the doorway with which we can kind of capture the imagination of our audience. Because when people see something beautiful, either something in nature or something in art that just takes your breath away, you say, wow, it moves the heart. It really can bring us close to that moment where we're really ready to hear that proclamation of the kerygma. It can lead us into an encounter with the divine. Also, goodness can do that in many ways too, because if there's no objective truth, then how do you explain people who unselfishly sacrifice of themselves for others? How do you explain real goodness in the world, right? Those are the guys, I've heard it said before that in our modern era, Mother Teresa led more people to conversion, led more people to Christ than just about anybody who lived. And she did that not so much through her preaching, but through her goodness, through her example. And people looked at her and said, wow, why does she do that? They wanted to know what made her tick. And then they heard the truths of her life, the truths that she professed. So paying attention to those three transcendentals, and particularly here in the directory, we have a vivid discussion of the arts, of music and visual arts in both historical and in modern catechesis. We see that discussed in the methodology section of the new directory. Another key theme, cultural change and challenge. I talked to you quite a bit about the chapter that most of this is covered in. So I won't revisit most of those points, but it's also of note here that this chapter includes a very lengthy section on digital culture and the changes that are brought by the digital world. This was actually one of the reasons that a new directory was seen as needed, because so much about the world has changed in the last 23 years since the last directory came out. So much has changed, and a lot of that change has been driven by technological innovation. Think about how much smaller and more connected the world has gotten because of digital technology. And so this section of the document talks about, in paragraphs, especially paragraphs 362 through 371, the the changes that have been brought by technological innovation, and how we now have a whole culture that's that exists online. That's a virtual culture, and that in that culture you have digital natives. Those are people who have grown up immersed in that culture. And you have digital immigrants, which would be, I think, all of us in this meeting. We all remember a time when the internet didn't exist. You know, when I have told in the past, when I've told kids and teens that I work with that I remember before they had the internet, they look at me like I came in a time machine, you know, like I'm a dinosaur. What? I mean, it's unbelievable to them. And then they ask questions like, well, you know, how did you know anything? You know, or what if you needed to find out something? How did you find it out? You know, because
Books.
you didn't have Google. Yeah, I know, books. And then they're like, yeah, there must have been a lot of books. But it's a cultural divide between the digital natives and the digital immigrants, and we each have something to share with one another, right? So, you know, if people our age want to know how to do something technologically speaking, a good person to ask is probably somebody 20 years younger than us, or more, 30 years younger than us. If you know, if those digital natives, though, you know, they need some guidance in that digital world, in that virtual world. And one of the things the directory points out is that it's important for digital natives to realize that there is a world that exists outside of and apart from the digital world, and that because the digital world is fraught with certain potential pitfalls, like the equalization of voices, that makes it difficult to know what's true and what's not true, and things like that, that they need some accompaniment and some guidance in critical thinking as they navigate that digital world as well. And that we as Catholics are called to be an evangelizing presence in the digital world. Also mentioned here are the potential for, especially for organizing and engaging young adults in the virtual world. So lots of different things here, both the blessings of technology as well as some of the challenges and boundaries of technology discussed in this chapter. And then a final key theme here, missionary discipleship. The new directory says catechesis, moreover, forms believers for mission, accompanying them in the maturation of attitudes of faith, making them aware that they're missionary disciples, called to participate actively in the proclamation of the gospel and to make the kingdom of God present in the world. Missionary discipleship, you see throughout the directory, references to the missionary role of the family as an agent of evangelization and catechesis, the importance of mission experiences for youth, the understanding of pastoral care of youth as a missionary outreach, the necessity of proposing concrete missionary exercise of charity and witness in the world as an element of catechesis with adults. All of those things discussed in that context. Couple of additional tidbits. We have in this directory a reformulated list of the tasks of catechesis. The most common question I got asked when people realized I was getting some sneak peeks during the process of the writing of the directory was, do we have the same tasks of catechesis? And the answer to that question is yes and no. You'll see all of the tasks here in this reformulated list. They're phrased a little differently. And you'll notice we now have 5 instead of 6 because 2 of the tasks of catechesis have been combined in this new reformulated list. So here are our 5 tasks now of catechesis: leading to knowledge of the faith. Remember, before it was promoting knowledge of the faith. Leading to knowledge of the faith kind of has that connotation of accompaniment that runs through the directory. Initiating into the celebration of the Christian mystery instead of liturgical education, which also I think has that context of the immersion in the Paschal mystery, the mystagogical catechesis. Third, forming for life in Christ. This one used to be called moral formation. This title, I think, was revised to more closely resemble this section of the catechism. Remember, these first 4 tasks are built on the 4 pillars of the catechism. So the third pillar of the catechism on morality is called life in Christ, because Christ is at the center of that. So this is called forming for life in Christ. And then the 4th task, teaching prayer. And then the 5th task, this is what used to be the 5th and 6th tasks of catechesis, which was education for community life and missionary initiation. So now we have introduction to community life, but that includes both building up the community and, as missionary disciples, contributing to its growth. So this introduction to community life is also about how the community then goes out and evangelizes the world. So missionary initiation now included in this 5th task of catechesis. And I think this really emphasizes Pope Francis's point that our communities should not be insular. When we talk about community, we're talking about a community that is engaged with the outside world. We're talking about a community that is in action and is constantly out as missionary disciples. We also have in this new directory tasks of adult catechesis. And just very quickly, these are 4 tasks: to elicit faith, to purify the faith from misunderstandings and superstitions and other things like that, nourishing faith, and assisting the sharing and witness of faith. The section on adult catechesis, which appears in chapter 8, I believe, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, the section on adult catechesis is particularly rich in this new directory. There are lots of bullet point lists. You have a list of bullet points of tasks of adult catechesis, sources of adult catechesis. You also have various types of adults that participate in adult catechesis and what their catechetical needs are. So I would refer you to that 8th chapter because, again, this directory emphasizes, as the prior one did, that catechesis of adults is the axis around which all other catechetical programming ought to revolve. So, challenging us again to make this the center of our catechetical program in the parish, not an add-on, but rather the foundation and the center. Because if we don't have well-formed adults, we will never have well-formed children. So much of catechesis happens in the home, in those everyday moments of family life. Without well-formed adults, that's going to be missing. And even parish catechesis, who's gonna lead the kids in catechesis if we don't have well-formed adults? So lots of arguments, I think, could be made here for the way that the church chooses to organize this. Catechesis of adults at the very center. All right. With methodology, some important points that are made about methodology in the directory. The plurality of methods. We don't just have one method in catechesis. There's no one catechetical method. There are many different ones. The new directory talks about human experience as a method, memory as a method, including memorization. We can't live a faith we don't know. So if we don't know the faith, how are we going to live that out? So both are important. It's not an either or, as some catechetical writers and thinkers sometimes might try to make us believe that it's one or the other. These are not opposite ends of the same continuum. These are both tools we need in our toolbox. Language, including the narrative language that we find throughout our Judeo-Christian tradition. The art of storytelling is so important to our faith, and also the language of art. The group and the ways that the group facilitates the catechetical process, catechesis as a function of the community. And also the space. We're challenged in this new directory to rethink our catechetical spaces. One of the things the new directory says is that catechetical spaces should not look like classrooms. Now, I would say in 99.8 or 9% of the parishes that I have visited, including the parish where I led as a parish catechetical leader, guess what the spaces for catechesis looked like? They were classrooms, right? So we're challenged here to rethink space and how space might also be a catechist and what that would look like.
And now we have to do 6 feet apart.
Yeah. So we're challenged in many ways to think about our catechetical space, aren't we? So I want to kind of close this by just giving a couple of practical dilemmas that we could chew on as catechetical leaders, and I would like to hear your input and thoughts about how some of what you've heard about the new directory, or some of what you might have already read in the new directory, would relate to some solutions for these different catechetical leaders. So here's the first one, Dilemma A. Miguel is the director of religious education at an urban parish with 100 families. He's concerned that kids, teens, and even adults in the parish are not fully engaged in catechesis because they haven't yet had a life-changing encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. What are some things Miguel can do to proclaim the kerygma to the people that he serves? What are some of your thoughts on that one? I'm gonna change my view here so I can see people. Okay, there
So
we go.
open up your mics.
Yeah, be sure to unmute yourself if you're going to chime in here.
And he read 100 families. It's actually 1,000 families.
Oh, yeah, 1,000 families. It's a big parish, urban parish. So,
Well, I would say some type of parish mission or retreat experience to really bring people into an encounter with Jesus and his message, and then, you know, some type of support system after that.
I would add to that a service opportunity, a way to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and then a good opportunity afterward to break that down in terms of the gospel message and in terms of what we're called to be as disciples.
very good. Anybody have another thought on that? I want to share with you some of the thoughts that I've posed these to other groups of catechetical leaders, and I thought you might be interested to see what some other folks have said as well. Some of what you already said, and some other things as well. Small groups, faith sharing, so sharing our faith stories sometimes can help facilitate that conversion in somebody else. Events with discipleship speakers, so that, you know, the retreat, parish mission kind of thing you're talking about. Am I addressing the head or the heart? Working people into the practice of prayer, importance of adoration. I mean, that is an encounter with the person of Jesus Christ, right? If people understand it as such, you know, that's important too, that people know what they're doing when they're in adoration. Gathering around food, mimicking that family experience, thinking about our language. I thought this one was interesting. A catechetical leader said, you know, when we talk about our hunger, our thirst, our brokenness, these are things that people can connect with and identify with, because sometimes today we need to help people get in touch with that need that all of us have for Jesus in our lives as well. How do we translate theological language into developmentally appropriate everyday language that connects with everyday life? Somebody said, we need to remember we're not a sage on the stage, but a guide on the side. It sounds like a youth minister. Temptation to think I have to turn the parish around instead of focusing on one person at a time, because this is a relational process. I think that's an important point for us to remember. Prayer, encouraging prayer and praying ourselves. And then remembering that much hinges on relationships between people and between the person and Jesus Christ. You want to look at another one?
Sure.
Here's Dilemma B. Veronica is the parish catechetical leader at a parish with 750 families. These are big parishes I used in these examples, aren't they? She has recently seen an increase in the number of learners with autism, ADHD, and other diverse learning needs in her program. What can she do to make sure she meets these needs? What are your thoughts on this one? And you could give me two different sets of answers, I guess, for this, because I know like we're dealing with this whole other challenge of trying to navigate these programs in the midst of the pandemic right now. But I think it's also helpful to think of, I mean, hopefully this is not going to last forever, right? they're talking about we may even have a vaccine by the end of the year. I don't know if that's overly optimistic, but that would be great. But assuming that we get back to, a pre-pandemic situation where we can do a little bit more, what would you think would be some things that a catechetical leader like this could do to make sure that she's including diverse learners?
It's really important with autism, especially, and ADHD, any kind of special needs student, to kind of understand what their parameters are. You can't put even a high functioning autism student into a regular classroom without some modifications and without some things to help them be successful. So you really need to learn how to structure their environment for success and then build on that. So if you as the DRE don't have that background or that understanding, it's really important that you find special education teachers, psychologists, diagnosticians, different people that are active and work in the environment to help you understand what those are. There's also some really good basic books out there, parents with students that have gotten a lot of support, with like picture communication, just all kinds of things that you do, less stimulation in the classroom, lots of environmental things that you do to set up to help these kids start successfully.
And the good news about that, I'll speak as a psychologist, is that those different things that you do, those accommodations that you make for learners with different diverse learning needs, very often benefit everybody in the group. So one of the things that you want to do for lots of different kinds of diverse learning needs, like ADHD or reading disabilities or things like that, is to make sure that you're using multiple senses, that you're involving kids in different ways, letting them move, letting them hear something and see something at the same time versus just one or the other. And that tends to engage the whole group much better when you do that. So, we're not talking about so much doing something that will only be for one kid in the class, as much as we're talking about, adding in some features that will really raise the learning of everybody in the group, which I think is also a helpful way to look at it and to frame it.
Joseph, this is Paul.
Yeah.
Going back to what you said just a little while ago about space, and I really liked that in the book as well. They're discouraging this classroom kind of space. With that in mind, and what you just said now too, if you can change the space to be more inclusive, we're not compartmentalizing people anymore, right?
Right.
Can you
Yeah.
just elaborate on how that can fit in with that space idea that you were talking about earlier?
Well, yeah, and there are, I think especially for diverse learners or for kids with learning challenges, the more that we structure this to look like school, the more they're going to feel like this is another environment where they're going to fail. and I think that's even true for adult learners, right? So, usually in our adult formation classes, unless we're very careful, what we end up getting is a lot of adults that are better educated and like school academic kinds of settings, and we want to reach out to all of our adult learners. And so I think when the space looks different, number one, it's more approachable and people feel more likely to be able to come in and be welcome and have some success there. But number two, it kind of opens up some new possibilities, right? So, when we don't have to structure it just like a classroom and make it like a typical class session, then what we do in there in terms of engaging head, heart, and hands really, it offers more flexibility. I don't know if that got at everything that you wanted me to get out there, but did you want to add anything to that? Oh,
No,
you're muted. Oh, here we go.
yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Joseph. I just wanted to get a little expanded view with those two, things kind of joined together. Thanks.
All right. So here are some things that some catechetical leaders said about this one. The importance of walking with or accompanying the family, because every learner with a disability is unique, and we can't define them by the disability. We can't say, well, this is what we do for kids with autism, or this is what we do for learners with ADHD, because every individual is going to come with their own set of strengths and their own areas of need. And so getting to know the family and accompanying them through this is important. Building trust, listening, even thinking about the wording that we have on our registration forms and announcements, making sure that people understand that we are committed to making reasonable accommodations for diverse learners. Exploring various options, looking outward, kind of looking for, I can't remember who mentioned it, but somebody mentioned, maybe getting the assistance of a special education teacher or something. If you have a college and or university in your area, sometimes it's helpful to contact the education department there and see if there are any Catholic students in special education that might be willing to do some work with you. If they're working with the kids, obviously they'll have to go through the Protecting God's Children training and things like that too. But they may actually be able to get some practicum credit for consulting with you as well. So it might be a mutually beneficial relationship. And then calling forth parishioners that might have expertise in that area. Education for the parish, some advocacy, support for parents, intentional outreach and invitation, openness to sacramental preparation and celebration. This is a particular area of concern for families of individuals with disabilities, as well as for DREs. I get a lot of questions about this. I want to make sure people are aware that the U.S. bishops have a document that's very helpful for sacramental preparation and celebration with persons with disabilities, with kids that have special learning needs and others as well. It's called Guidelines for the Celebration of the Sacraments with Persons with Disabilities. Guidelines for the Celebration of the Sacraments for Persons with Disabilities. Just Google that and you'll get the document. It probably is easier than finding it in the search on the USCCB website, but that's where you'll end up going. Because it's right there for you online. And some people are surprised sometimes by the particular recommendations of our bishops. It's important to know this is one of the few documents that the U.S. bishops have passed unanimously, not a single vote against. So every bishop expressed support of the guidelines that are in this document. So you can use that with confidence in your parish and say, this is what the guidelines from our bishops say to do. And so this is how, I'm going to help prepare this person for the sacraments. Okay, so having a deanery or parish awareness day, remembering this is a pro-life issue. This is about the dignity of the human person. Each of us is created in God's own image and likeness. And also remembering to ask, what are the strengths and how can persons with disabilities use their gifts? Last one of these. Lynn works as a director of faith formation in a culturally diverse parish with a number of spiritual movements, such as the Christian Family Movement, Movimiento Familiar Cristiano in Spanish, and Acts retreats, as well as groups that come together for popular devotions like a Divine Mercy group. How might Lynn begin to collaborate with these groups in order to strengthen catechesis at her parish? I'm especially interested to know if you've been able to collaborate with some movements and groups in your parish in catechesis and what that might look like. So anybody have any input on this one? Don't all speak at once, though.
Well, this is Paul. I like to give our participants a chance, But one of the first things that strikes me is, having a guest from those different movements come and share their experience, with their particular, devotional, thing. I mean, one thing about Catholicism with this huge umbrella of all these traditions and movements and spiritualities. So I just think maybe sometimes having somebody from one of those little communities within the larger community come and share their experience can be helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good.
And it could be helpful to them as well. Some people in these groups are so myopic as far as this is the only way, and they forget about their parish. So involving them and utilizing their gifts can help expand their whole vision of what it means to be church.
Absolutely. Yeah. Here are some of the suggestions that some other catechetical leaders have given that I thought were helpful. One said, well, it takes some time, so give it some time to establish those relationships. You need to invest time in each group in person. To ask what are the needs of the people in the parish and the groups in the parish, to make sure that we have some pastoral sensitivity, especially with different cultural ministries, is very important. Everyone should be welcomed. If a change is going to be made, it should be explained. I think this speaks to how people sometimes feel when they're in these groups and movements and all of a sudden they don't have a meeting space anymore, or the process for approving those groups changes or things like that. So that communication is really important about, what changes are going to happen and why and stuff like that. Affirm that each group has something to offer. Always seek common ground. One of the things that the directory talks about in the section that Catechesis in Community, which is chapter 9, I think, that I think is helpful, is this idea that we do all have common ground, that there's kind of a core of our message that's the same because we're united by our Catholic faith. Bringing the cultures of the parish together to celebrate the patron of the parish was one idea that somebody had. I thought that was nice. Linking different movements and groups to the faith formation program in some way, like having the Divine Mercy group pray for the confirmation candidates. I really liked this suggestion, giving, some particular ownership for some little part of that faith formation program, that they could do something for them. I thought was really nice. And then having a common experience, family gatherings together, I thought was a good idea too. So in closing here, I just want to recommend a couple of different resources. Number one, the Directory for Catechesis. If you don't have a copy of that yet, you definitely should have a copy. You can get that from the USCCB. Our Sunday Visitor also distributes the directory. You can order it from us as well. I'm sure Mike would be happy to hook you up with that. Also, I have written a booklet called The Catechist Guide for the Directory for Catechesis. This was a project I did in conjunction with NCCL, so it's co-published with NCCL and OSV, available in bulk in packs of 10, I think, or something like that, and then as in single copies as well. I want to make sure everybody knows about the Magnify virtual event with NCCL and OSV, where we're going to walk through the directory in much more detail, chapter by chapter, beginning this month. September 18th, I think, is the start. We've got about 700 or 800 catechetical leaders already registered for that, so it should be a really big, rich event. Lots of great speakers. Yours truly notwithstanding, I will be there, but you'll come for other folks, I'm sure. There are some great keynotes and chapter talks by the experts. I mean, we've actually got one of the writers of the directory who I think chooses not to let people know that she was one of the contributors, but she's going to actually be talking about the portion of the directory that she wrote. So you're going to get it straight from the horse's mouth. Oh, don't tell her that I called her a horse. You're going to hear it straight from the source here at the, actually two different writers will be speaking during the Magnify conference. And then, of course, you know, I'd always love to see you follow me on social media, where I only post things that are like little relevant research tidbits or helpful links for catechists and catechetical leaders and events in the church that you may be interested in, curious about. I don't use it for advertising, so you won't get junk tweets from me. But if you're on Twitter, I'm at @JosephOSV. If you're on Facebook, you can link to me on Facebook too, but the address is a little more complicated, so it's easiest just to find me on my website at sharingcatholicfaith.com and then click the Facebook icon. So that's sharingcatholicfaith.com. It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning. I appreciate your participation and discussion too on those dilemmas. And we have, I guess, a few more minutes before the noon hour. If there are any last minute questions or anything.
And I think Mike was going to share some things as well.
Yeah, that's right. We need a word from our sponsors here too, don't we? So I'm going to turn it over to Mike now. Sorry, Mike.
Joseph, and thank you very much for your presentation. We do appreciate. One quick question. The Magnify event, is it like Witness where it's going to be recorded if we have any commitments during the same time?
Yeah, that's what I understand.
Okay.
You'll be able to, there are going to be some live talks, but it'll be recorded and you'll have access to that throughout the 4-month event. So
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you guys would like, I can share a couple of words from the sponsor here. If you don't mind, I'm going to just share my screen really quick so you can kind of see some information that I'd like to share about OSV. And it's just a little overview of the support that we provide and who we are as a company. So that being said, I am going to just show this slide that I have here with my contact information. Can you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, cool. So Joseph mentioned the Director of Catechesis. That is something that we are also that we can offer to everybody. So if you're interested in getting a copy, your own personal copy of the directory, I believe they're $24.95. But then you have the source as far as the document is concerned. For those of you that have catechists that would like a breakdown that Joseph wrote for each of your catechists, it's a very simplified overview of the directory. We can also sell those in 10 packs at a discount. So if you're looking for getting those for your catechists, just let me know. My contact information is right there on the screen. It's mhoyt@osv.com. Feel free to email me. I'm your local representative there for the Diocese of Beaumont. And you can also call me directly on my cell phone, which is 331-431-2400. And as many of you know, OSV also provides support for faith formation, especially considering the challenges that we're all facing this fall. So if you're looking for flexibility or a strong technology component or even affordability, these are all things that we would provide for you. And I know that the window is getting smaller and we're about ready to start that school year digitally or virtually, and those classes are around the corner. But if anybody is still trying to make a decision and would like more information, I'd be happy to offer a consultation, more so to listen to what your specific needs are and what you're trying to accomplish. And I can tell you about any specific tools and resources that we provide that could be a good fit for you and for your families. And I think this is one of the areas where we stand apart. When you're looking at all the other publishers that are out there, there are plenty of good publishers, but if you're looking for a publisher that is non-for-profit, as you can see, we donate the money and the revenue we receive right back to the church. If you're looking for training, that is something that we also include in English y también en español. Yeah, I can provide the training in either language. That is something that we include. Even we talk about virtual faith formation, and we need a platform. You can have the best content in the world. You can have the richest, let's say, message, like the gospel is the most beautiful message that has ever been uttered. But the problem is, a lot of times it's the delivery. How do we deliver that beautiful message to our people? How do we communicate that message? So when it comes to a virtual platform, OSV is using a free sharing platform called Flipgrid. Flipgrid is it's a free Microsoft product. I'd be happy to get you up to speed on how to use that. And OSV has already done the work for you. We've put all our lessons right into Flipgrid and they're ready to go. So those are some areas where we could perhaps help you. And again, my contact information is right there on the screen. My email, my phone number. Feel free to reach out if there's anything that you need. We can help you and support you in your ministry. So thank you for the quick word from the sponsor, and I look forward to working with the Diocese of Beaumont and continue work, and also with all your parishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, very much. And thank you for helping to put on this very, very important presentation on this very important document, the Directory for Catechesis. I think it's extremely important. It's going to be an important document for each of you, for all parish catechetical leaders, as you navigate new ways of proclaiming and passing on the faith. So we do thank you very much. Any questions with anyone for Dr. White or for Mike?
Brian, do we just want to call their attention once again to go to the chat box to those links that have been posted, our Joseph, and I think there's some from OSV there. So click those links in the chat box, folks, and then save them so you can go back to them.
Yeah, so take some time right now to do that. Joseph did the work for you, so make sure that you save those links. One is to NCCL announcing Magnify with all the information. Another one is the guidelines for sacraments for persons with disabilities. We have, let me see, was there one earlier? Yes, Joseph put up from the USCCB Catholic Social Teaching, the 7 themes from Catholic Social Teaching. So any questions? Otherwise, thank you so much for all that you do to pass on the faith in your parish communities. I think we are blessed to have you, and you have a very, very important role. And we're trying to navigate through the pandemic and trying to do the best we can to reach our families, to reach our adults, to reach our children, reach our youth, reach everyone, persons with disabilities, all cultures, and reach out to everyone as far as our evangelizing mission goes. So I do thank you for everyone, for all that you do and all that you are. Well, God bless. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.